I'm Renee Williams.
And I'm Billy Thomas.
And welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. We have a lot of different topics today, and they're all extremely interesting. And it's just going to be a really, really neat show.
Yes, no doubt. I'm really excited to have everybody with us. We appreciate you being here today. We're going to be talking about a range of different topics. All of them are related to forests and wildlife and natural resources here in Kentucky. We're going to have Dr. Amanda Gumpert's going to start us off today. She's going to be talking about some projects she's been working on climate education. So we'll hear more from Dr. Gumpert here in a few minutes. We also have Dr. Matt Springer, who's going to be talking about the Hummingbird Festival that's coming up. So some of our friends out in Western Kentucky, you got a great festival coming up soon. Dr. Springer will be down there and he'll be talking about that a bit and about hummingbirds as well. And then we have Dr. Ellen Crocker, our forest health specialist, going to be talking about another one of those pesky plants we have to keep an eye out for. So really excited to have this lineup. I'm glad to have you all with us. If you have any questions, please use the chat function to interact with us. And if you're on YouTube, please use email and hit us at forestry.extension@uky.edu and we will get back with you. But glad to be here. Glad to be with you, Renee, and glad to have this great lineup of speakers today.
Definitely. So let's go ahead and get started. So Dr. Gumbert, if you'd like to, hey, how are you this morning?
Hey, hi, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, climate education. Now that sounds like a very interesting topic because a lot of people don't know exactly what that is. Am I correct?
You're probably right. We're going to try to at least go through a little terminology and maybe just do a little level setting. Some of this information, some of our folks will know, and others will. Hopefully, it'll help to start to clear things up a little bit. I think there's maybe some climate confusion, so maybe that's a talk for
Sounds like we need some climate education.
Bring it on.
All right. Well, let me get my slides sharing here, and we'll take off. Does that look okay to you?
Looks great.
All right. Well, great. So I'm going to talk a little bit. I had a hard time deciding what to title this talk, and so I kind of landed on climate science, education, and communication. And so I don't have enough time to even start to crack the nut of climate and all the issues surrounding it, but we'll just use this as a jump off point, so a little bit of a launch for maybe some future discussions as well. So when I was putting this together, I thought, gosh, everywhere I look in the news, I can't turn the news on or pull the news up on my phone or look at the weather for the day without really being bombarded with lots of hot topics and concerns about climate. We've been hearing and experiencing a heat wave recently, and also just so far this in the past week, these are the top two things that I'm seeing in the news. One is that scientists are very concerned about the coral in Florida from the heat wave there, and the water being essentially like a hot tub. So that we're seeing, as well as the Atlantic jet stream potentially close to collapse. And so those are things that that can bring about a little bit of anxiety and concern and confusion, and then you're wondering where you should get your information. And so that's just kind of a glimpse into some of what we're seeing in the news recently. And also, so let's take a minute and talk a bit about language and terminology. I think global warming is one of the terms that I had seen a lot, probably 15, 20 years ago. That's maybe the emerging phrase that we were starting to hear, but it's also somewhat can be tied to political controversy, or it's been politicized. Climate change seems to be the phrase that I see a lot now. That's the thing that's prominent in the news. And also things like extreme weather and natural disasters. And so those are all ones that I feel like can be lumped into this climate language and climate terminology. And, here in Kentucky, we have had our fair share of disasters. And according to a FEMA report this year, Kentucky's had 31 severe storms or flood disasters declared in the past 20 years. So that's more than one a year on the average. And so it's certainly something that many of us have experienced firsthand. So we've kind of talked about those four terms, but what I want to talk about now are individually, we'll talk a little bit about climate science, climate education, and climate communication. And so the way I'm going to approach this, again, this is kind of a high level approach to these is, what are some places that we can look to for unbiased information and information that we can trust and information that's not really trying to sell us on a particular view or a particular point. So in the academic setting, I guess we kind of think about things in terms of climate science, education, and communication. Those other four terms are certainly ones that we utilize and are certainly ones that are all in the mix, but we're going to talk about these final three for the remainder of the talk today. So what I'm going to do is I've organized this into reliable sources of information. And so starting out with climate science, and the place I look to first and foremost is NOAA. So the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It's a US government entity, and NOAA has a very robust web presence and information that's there on their website. Things that you can find there quite easily: climate summaries, historic weather data, things like record temperatures, record precipitation rates, in those extremes. So if we're really looking for some pinpointed data, that's a really good place to look. And so those summaries are there. Also important to remember, weather and climate are different. Weather is shorter term, climate is a longer term perspective. So also keep that in mind as well. So one thing that NOAA has are these climate summaries organized by state. And so this is the one for Kentucky. And the most recent is as of 2022. And I found these visualizations, and I thought these were really interesting ways to look at climate. So this is a visualization of Kentucky's temperature. And this is since 1895 to 2022. That's the span of these. And so what this says is that the red bars or the reddish pink color are warmer years, and the bluish toned ones are cooler years. And so these are the departures from the average temperature from 1895 to 2022. So if we take an average of that and then we look year by year, each bar represents a year, and that represents kind of what the temperature swings have done. 1895 being on the left-hand side and then 2022 being on the right-hand side. So you can kind of see clusters of red and blue in that. And so I just thought this was a really interesting way to visualize the data. And this is information and an image that came from NOAA. Here's another one. They call this the climate stripes. And so this is another one for Kentucky and Kentucky's precipitation. And so again, this is Kentucky's annual precipitation compared to the 20th century average. So green represents wetter years, brown represents drier years. So kind of the summary for this is that temperatures in Kentucky on average have risen 0.6 degrees Fahrenheit. That's less than half of the contiguous US average since the early 1900s. And our warmest consecutive 5-year interval was 2016 to 2020. Now, this year may change that a little bit as that warmest interval, but after we get that data, usually there's a year or two lag in what data is available so that scientists have been able to review it. Our rainfall, total annual precipitation exhibits an upward trend. And since 2011, we've averaged nearly 7.5 inches above long-term average. So kind of what's the takeaway from these climate summaries for Kentucky? Looks like the frequency and intensity of extreme precipitation are projected. But then at the same time, we have an increase in evaporation rates due to those rising temperatures. So what we might see is heavy precipitation and also coupled with droughts. And we won't dig any deeper into that right now, but that's just kind of a snapshot. So that's kind of that climate science perspective coming from NOAA. Now, if we look to climate education, the one place that most of us look is the IPCC. You've probably heard that in the news and um, or seen it in reports or in the media, and that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And the IPCC was created in 1988 by the World Meteorological Organization and the United Nations Environmental Program. And the whole objective of the IPCC is to provide governments with scientific information so that they can develop climate policies. So it is that UN body for assessing the science related to climate change and also looking at impacts, future risks, and making suggestions for adaptation and mitigation. And so some of the products that you might see coming from the IPCC is they do have had several synthesis reports that I think we're in our sixth synthesis report right now, and they're looking at the state of the science, that what technical socioeconomic knowledge there is about climate and climate change, future risks, what are the current impacts, those kind of things. So they're looking at it from a global perspective, and how do we get that information to governments so that policies can be made. And so you might see these kind of very complicated, I think, graphics sometimes. This is just a methane budget graphic, and I don't intend for you to capture all of the specific data that's here, but just know that these are the types of graphics that you might find in an IPCC report. So things that are, kind of representing the sources and sinks for greenhouse gases. So this is just one for methane in particular. And so that sometimes is really used for policy development and looking at adaptation or mitigation strategies for climate. So we'll move on over into climate communication and kind of a go-to place for us, maybe the gold standard is the Yale program on climate change communication. That organization conducts research on public climate change knowledge, attitudes, policy preferences, and behavior. So this is sort of that social science perspective. So taking the natural science research and combining it with the social sciences and developing communication strategies that engage different audiences and solutions. They also develop climate opinion maps. So they do polls and surveys of the public and try to get public opinion and a snapshot of that public opinion related to climate. And so one thing you might have seen or maybe have heard about, they have something called Global Warming 6 Americas. And so I'm not exactly sure which year this was started, but so they use global warming as a terminology. And now, we're wondering maybe there are some connotations to global warming, like we talked about before. That phrase has been somewhat politicized. But they've continued with that terminology just for continuity's sake. And so the 6 Americas that they described is that the basis is that most Americans can fall in one of these 6 categories in how they view climate and climate change. So you may be on one far end of the spectrum of being alarmed, and maybe a little less alarmed but concerned or cautious. And then we also have disengaged, doubtful, and dismissive. So everybody, we think from their research, falls somewhere along that spectrum of how we look at climate change. They also produce products that look like this. And so this is from a recent report this spring and it's the title is "A Majority of Americans Are Worried About Harm from Environmental Problems in Their Local Area." And so on the vertical axis, you see some of those environmental problems. So extreme heat, air pollution, water pollution, droughts, agricultural pest diseases, all the way. So several of those what could be considered natural disasters, of course. And the darker green means very worried. And then toward the yellow is not at all worried. So that kind of shows you where Americans' mindsets are following. And so that's kind of as the entire US. And then one more slide about that is what do Kentuckians think? So this is just a specific question. And this is an estimated percent of adults who think global warming is happening. And this is as of 2021. So this is just a visualization of some of the research that Yale conducts. So local to Kentucky, another climate communication source is the Kentucky Climate Consortium. The Kentucky Climate Consortium is a multidisciplinary network of folks that are involved in higher education across Kentucky. It was started here with some of our faculty members at the University of Kentucky, but we have membership from all over the state. And so I've participated with KYCC as well as several of my colleagues. And we support research, teaching, and outreach related to climate. And so we're looking at all of these areas of the spectrum: climate science, climate education, and climate communication. So some of the things we've done are climate chats, and that's kind of really among the members of the consortium, but then also pairing that with some public outreach. So that's what's going on here in Kentucky. So here's a summary of what I've covered in terms of reliable sources of climate information. For climate science, I look to NOAA. NASA is another source of good information. Climate education, I would look to the IPCC. And then climate communication, the Yale program, as well as the Kentucky Climate Consortium. And, the thing to keep in mind is wherever you get your information, let's just have some basic information literacy. Here at the University of Kentucky, we, our what we stand by is research-based information. And so information literacy is extremely important to us. This is a concept that we teach our students in the classroom. We also want to remind our public audiences as well, is making sure that you know the source of the information that you're receiving and look for reputable research institutions, agencies, or organizations. Do they have a good reputation for providing objective, peer-reviewed information? And then, making sure it's research-based. Some questions to ask might be, do multiple studies have similar findings? Has the data that you're looking at been peer-reviewed? And so keeping in mind that most popular media is not peer-reviewed, but it might include data from scientific studies. So always kind of look for the fine print in the information that you're consuming and making sure that it is coming from a reputable source. So that is what I've got for today. So I'll wrap that up. And if folks have questions that have come up, feel free to. I don't know, Renee, you might see them. All I've seen are my slide screen.
Yeah,
So
no,
tell me
I
what the questions
there's
are.
only one so far, and I'm going to kind of summarize.
Okay.
They said he has personally seen an increase in climate anxiety in groups and wanted to know if we had any resources that are slightly less academic that talk about the magnitude of climate change without presenting it in a way that feels overwhelming or beyond hope.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. And I can tell you that just putting this talk together is a little overwhelming. I'm like, how do I even begin to share, how to distill the information?
Mhm.
And several of our extension services throughout the United States have some resources available. We are working on a project here in Kentucky with the Kentucky Extension Service to develop some just initial tools for just doing just that, digesting the information that's available. But we like to also pair it with some adaptation strategies. What are some concrete things that we can do to feel like we have hope and to feel like we have a bit of participation or we can control that?
Right.
And I would, say anything that already that is good for natural resources is most likely going to also be a positive toward our changing climate. So things like anything that's going to protect water quality and water resources or water conservation, those are great things. Plant trees. Oh my goodness. I mean, plant all the trees all the time. Well, not all the time. I know proper planting
Proper
time.
time.
Sorry.
That's
But
okay. I
yes,
love the
yeah,
enthusiasm.
plant trees and I mean, if nothing else, that always gives us a bit of hope to put something living in the ground. So, yeah, great question. And I see that Lee shared an organization, the Project Drawdown, that has some good resources as well.
Okay, that would need to go with to everybody. That was just a host and panelist. So just so you know, if we need to redo
Oh,
that.
okay. Yeah, I can go then
Um,
and maybe we could
Go
do
ahead
that
and put
later.
that
Yeah.
in.
All
All
right.
right. Well, thank
Thank
you
you so
so
much.
much, Dr. Gumbert. That was an amazing thing. And, it was really interesting. And I really liked those graphics because it kind of narrowed down a wide range of data and really helped you to kind of see what was going on. And I know, data can be overwhelming sometimes. And so that was a great way to present that. We appreciate that.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dr. Gilbert.
All
Right.
right.
Next,
We have our Hummingbird Festival coming up, and
This
Dr.
is the
Springer,
season, right, Dr.
yeah,
Springer?
is here to talk about that and tell us a little bit about hummingbirds on the side as well.
Yeah, so it is one of my favorite times of the year because I get to go to this festival every year. It's at the Woodland Nature Station, and we've had John, who runs the station as the head naturalist, was on the show last year to talk about the festival. Obviously, if I'm talking about it again, I think it's a worthwhile experience and to bring attention to. Not often do you get to have a whole bunch of people get together for a bird that way, is about that big,
Right.
I just wanted to kind of take the time on the show today, remind folks about that opportunity, and kind of talk about probably one of the more cherished birds across Kentucky, I would say, in terms of overall public viewpoint of them. With that, I will kind of get into what I got here, and we can kind of talk a little bit about hummingbirds.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So let's make sure. Yeah, hopefully that's working. Yeah. As I was bragging earlier about my ability to put this slide together and how I cheated, but I thought it was pretty cool. So, and a good way to kind of talk about some of the awesomeness that is a hummingbird here and their ability to sit there and hover and collect nectar and move pollen around and act as a pollinator for us. So with that, I'm going to kind of go into a little bit about hummingbirds and hummingbirds in Kentucky. And then talk somewhat about how we can help hummingbirds. What are the ways that you can potentially improve your property if you want to see more hummingbirds, and a little bit about feeders and feeder care, those kind of things. So it's a real quick summary, and then we'll get into the specifics about the festival that's happening this weekend. In all of Kentucky, we basically have one species of hummingbird that is seen on a regular basis. There are reports of 5 total species within the state, including those of the black-chinned, broad-tailed, green-violet ear, and now more frequently occurring species of the rufous hummingbird. But all in all, if you see a hummingbird in Kentucky, the odds are that it is a ruby-throated hummingbird. The big problem that we have with hummingbirds is they move around so fast that it's really hard to potentially ID them at times. So we're kind of lucky in that sense that we know, pretty much that it's this species. Now, if you were out in California, you'd have 5 or 6 species that you'd have to try to ID. With a bird that can fly upwards of 40 miles an hour, that can get pretty difficult, especially when it's all about 3 inches, 4 inches tall. Whenever possible, when I talk about bird ID, I like to involve cartoons because I think they're a great way of getting scientific communication across. So I found this nifty cartoon of how to tell a male hummingbird from a female hummingbird, because a lot of folks always ask, is this a male, is this a female? Because we all know it's one species, but there is some sexual dimorphism, so they look different. And the big thing to take away, if you want to know whether or not you have a hummingbird outside, whether it's a male or a female, is to look at that throat patch. So the area that's underneath that beak, if it is a mature male, so at this time of year it can be difficult, but a mature male will have a very red, ruby-throated, right? And I wonder why they came up with the name of the species that way. A ruby-throated throat patch underneath that beak there, that is a mature male. And the females, though they will have that metallic green appearance across their body, they will lack that throat patch. They are also going to be a little bit more grayish, olivey color on their belly. And so they're a little bit duller. They're not trying to attract all that attention and flashing that throat patch to declare your territory, because these guys are territorial species. The males in particular will very much defend a territory that has the proper nutritional attributes that could attract a mate or more than one mate. So those would include things like nectar or nectar producing plants. They could be feeders, so an artificial nectar source. But their other dietary components include things like insects, and even on occasion they'll drink from the wells that are created by sapsuckers. So they'll drink the fresh sap out of those wells. That is not a common thing, especially where we are. For the most part, these guys are a nectar consuming species. And while they do that, they're also playing the role of pollinator, taking the pollen and bouncing from flower to flower. So we get that added ecological benefit. As you can see, Kentucky falls within the breeding range of our hummingbird species here. So it's not common for us to see them in winter. They would have a very hard time staying alive. Usually our hummingbirds are migrating up. We get here about April, and most of the hummingbirds are gone from Kentucky about mid-September. And they're going all the way down to Central America to spend their winter. And, you know, on occasion, they will get lost and end up over in California, just like our California birds on occasion have gotten lost and ended up in Kentucky. But they are a migratory species, and one that many people very much look forward to seeing every year in the spring. In terms of migration, and the reason why the Hummingbird Festival is happening this weekend and does so every year is it is really the beginning and almost peak of our fall migration as birds start transitioning south from the northern parts of the range. Usually the adult males leave first because they are not good dads. They have no role in raising the young. The females do it all themselves. So they leave first to go down and get the best places to survive in the winter range, and then the females in the young of the year will start transitioning a little bit later and a little bit slower as those they gain size and weight that they need to make that migration. And this is where a lot of people want to help. They want to try to help hummingbirds because they want to see a lot more of them, and they want to make sure that they're around and hanging around their house, because there's really no downside to having a hummingbird around. Unless you don't like little things buzzing around your head that aren't going to bite you. So I guess that would be the only downside. But we get a lot of phone calls, especially in the spring, when people are asking, well, I don't have my hummingbirds back this year. Is the population crashing? Those kind of questions. And to be honest, you know, most bird species are not doing great. Hummingbirds, some of them are following that trend, but our hummingbird, the ruby-throated hummingbird we have here, is pretty stable. There's some back and forth on how stable they are. There's some evidence that their population may be declining, and there's evidence from the breeding bird survey that their abundance is actually increasing. So what I would take from that is they may be decreasing slightly, they may be increasing slightly, but that kind of points to, you take the midpoint, it's probably a stable population. However, it can't hurt to help them so that you can try to head off any crash that may happen. And the easiest way to do that when we talk about wildlife in general is when you try to manage for wildlife, it's increasing food and increasing cover and space, creating the correct habitat components in a larger area. So if you are going to increase food and cover, which cover really is trees and bushes to escape predators, but food is the big one. So the way we look at that is trying to increase the food that they eat, which for hummingbirds is nectar. So we need to increase the number of native plants that produce flowers that these hummingbirds will feed from. And as you can see, this bird in the top picture here is actually feeding from an obedient plant. And it's a pink plant, and you're going to see a general trend outside of this here in the next few slides when I talk about what plants you can put in your yard or on your property that help attract them. Other ways that you can, help hummingbirds outside of planting natives is you can put feeders out. Unfortunately, when we talk about feeders, we're if you're in certain areas of the state of Kentucky now, you're putting sugar water out. And you may, as with all bird feeders, attract bears. So if you have bears around, you don't want to be putting feeders out, unfortunately. That's going to just raise your risk of having some other human wildlife interactions that you may not want to have. But if you're in areas that you don't have bears, then, adding a feeder or two or more, some people get crazy and add dozens and dozens, is not a bad way of helping these guys out by increasing food supply. Other ways you can help if you don't want to put feeders out is doing things like monitoring their population and migration and breeding areas by using tools like eBird or the Merlin app, where you just can report your sightings of hummingbirds and they track that data over time to look at trends of the populations. So that helps the scientists know where you're seeing hummingbirds and if you're regularly seeing hummingbirds. So it's all good, and get active in that community science. So if you're looking at helping hummingbirds on the planting side, there's lots of different native plants, and the general rule for hummingbirds is they really like red. That's why the feeders are all usually red. Red is a great attractor to them. It's not the only one. There's other colors that they like. And for the most part, any native forb that produces a nectar that they can get access to, they're probably going to feed from. But they're really hardwired to go check out red flowers. And even when you have non-native plants that they may not be able to access to, they're going to probably try. But some great examples of options are things like columbine, which is one of the earlier flowering plants. So it actually helps meet that need early in the spring. Then you can get into things like bee balm. There's all kinds of varieties. The one that you probably want on the red side is actually the scarlet bee balm, but regular old native versions of that group work just fine, whether they're pink or whitish blue, light colored. They will still attract hummingbirds, and they will benefit from them. The one that I'm a big fan of that I have in my house at this point in time is the coral honeysuckle, which is this top right picture. And they throw off a whole bunch of little tube flowers that are pinkish red. And the hummingbird, when those flowers are out, are all over that for a long time. And they throw out, the plants, when they mature, throw out a ton of those flowers. One of the ones that would be just blooming about now, that is a real favorite for hummingbirds, is the cardinal flower, which is a great option. It's one of the lavalias, and they will get used heavily if they're present in the landscape. And you can plant them in bunches so that you have lots of options there for those birds to choose from. Other more common plants that we see include coneflowers. Hummingbirds will readily use those, many of the phlox species. And we are in the Department of Forestry, so I had to throw in some trees in here. One that they'll regularly use that is not a real pinkish color is the northern catalpa tree, which is a great flowering tree that we don't see a whole lot of use outside of in terms of wood products. But it is a great plant for many of our pollinators. And then early in the season, hummingbirds, if they are here early enough, they will use the eastern redbuds, which obviously throw off that pink color that attracts them quite well. So those are some examples. And the general theme here is any native flowering plant is probably going to have some value to hummingbirds. Some are better than others, but most of them can be accessed by hummingbirds in our state. Now, if you want to go the route of feeding them, there's a few things you need to be aware of. So most of the feeders kind of look like this, where you have a red base with a cone that is shaped kind of like a flower that the hummingbirds can access, usually can perch on it to get access. They don't necessarily need to perch to feed, but it helps lower that metabolic demand on them if they can perch. Because in order to hover, they're beating about 80 times a second to hold that location in place for them to feed. So if they can stop beating their wings so fast, that lowers that metabolic demand, so it does them a favor. So perches aren't necessarily a bad thing. When you're thinking about adding these, the big thing, there's controversy that a lot of folks talk about in terms of, well, red dye can actually make them infertile. There's been no scientific evidence about that I am aware of. And you don't have to use the red dye solutions that they sell in the store to fill your feeders. A simple solution of 1 cup sugar and 4 cups water, stirred together, warmed up, stirred together, let cool. You can put it in the feeder and it works just fine for what they need. You want to place these near shelter for the birds. So somewhere near a tree or a bush that they can go bounce back and forth from to escape predators if needed. And also in partial shade or full shade, because the more sunlight that is on these feeders, that sugar water can spoil. And if it does spoil, they usually will stop using it, or they can potentially get sick from it. So you want to avoid direct sunlight. You also don't necessarily want to put these immediately adjacent to any windows, because windows, unfortunately for birds, are not their best friend. And a lot of times they'll run into them, causing them to either concuss themselves or other potential fatal outcomes. So you want to give a little distance away from any windows, but still you want to make sure you can enjoy watching them. So have it somewhere that you can see your feeder and take in what's going on. More than likely, if you're successful, you'll have one male that probably tries to defend the feeder, or maybe some other males that try to partake. So you get to watch them fight it out in a aerial battle of speed and agility. The big thing, though, that you need to keep in mind with these feeders is you're going to want to clean them on a regular basis. When I say regular basis, I mean probably every other day with hot soapy water. It'll help to cut down on any ant issues that you have. There are tricks and options available to deal with ants if you start getting into them. There's plenty of information out there on how to get rid of ants all around these feeders if you need to. So just be ready for that as a problem. The other thing is bees and yellow jackets will potentially partake. So it's something to be cognizant of if you or somebody you know has any kind of allergic reaction to those insects, that you're thinking a little bit more about where you may want to place these feeders. With that, I want to mention the Hummingbird Festival that's at the Woodland Nature Station. It's this weekend. Here's the flyer for it. You can see all the activities going on. It runs from 10 to 4 p.m. on both Saturday and Sunday at the station, and they have all kinds of tables that are set out with a bunch of different partners, including myself, who's going to be there. There's several seminars talking about hummingbirds and also other birds and how you can make your yard and your property more bird friendly. And other wildlife. It's within the actual nature station itself, so you can go out there and take a tour. It's kind of a mini zoo of native wildlife. I always have been lucky enough to be put next to the bobcats enclosure, so I get to spend my day as technically working for the wildcats with a wildcat. So I always appreciate that. But there's various resources, including usually Ironweed Nursery is out there selling native plants. So not only can you go learn about hummingbirds, but you can potentially come home with a bunch of plants to improve the habitat in your yard for hummingbirds. So this is an annual event. And I think we're well above 20 years that they've been running this. It does have a small entrance fee for folks to enter. So be aware of that. I think it's well worth your time. My kids have personally loved it. They're asking to go back this year. If you have natural resource interest, this is one thing that you can put on your calendar or should experience at least once and check it out. More information, we actually have a publication within our department from my predecessor, Dr. Tom Barnes, on hummingbirds and how to attract them to your garden. So if you'd like more detailed information on strategies on doing that, just ask your county extension agent for FOR 97 or look for it on our website here at the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources. And with that, I will happily take any questions.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. I love seeing I have never seen hummingbirds in the 21 years I've lived in my house, and this year I finally saw one. And so I was really excited that we actually had some this year. I'm sure maybe I just haven't seen them, but and that they've been there, but it was nice to actually see one.
Yeah, if there's no food around, then they probably won't stick around, right? So that's that component where if you put a feeder up, you'll probably get one. They do travel quite a bit and they do find those food sources. I have it in my yard, but I've got a lot of those flocks and other things that will attract them. So I enjoy seeing them every year.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just amazing that such a small bird can travel so far, right? I mean, it's really cool. Nature is so amazing.
I got a quick fact for you, Billy, since you brought that up. So they make the journey from Central America. They fly the Gulf in one night, and that metabolic demand is equal to the amount of their weight during the non-migratory season. So right now, so they actually have to double in size just in order to make that trip over the Gulf each year.
Yeah, that is a cool fact. Yeah. Man, Dr. Springer, thank you so much for kind of enlightening us on some of the really cool things that we may or may not pay attention to, and hummingbirds are certainly a very awesome one. So
No
thank you.
problem. And I hope I see some folks out at the station this weekend.
Yeah, get out there and get your wildlife
Out there.
questions answered by Dr. Springer. So thank you again, Dr.
Thank
Springer.
you.
All right, good
Right.
deal.
Moving on, we have Dr. Ellen Crocker on tap. Hey, how
Hey
are
everyone,
you?
how's it going?
Good. How are
Good.
you?
So what are we
Yeah,
gonna
I just
about
saw
today?
some hummingbirds in my yard yesterday. I have
Awesome.
cardinal flowers, so they were loving them.
Oh, good. You're doing your part. I love it.
Well, I get to see the hummingbirds, so I like
Yeah,
that part.
there you go. Win-win.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So what's pesky about this week?
Well, this week we're not really talking about a new invasive per se. This is an invasive plant that has been here for a little while, autumn olive.
Mhm.
Probably many of you watching are all too familiar with autumn olive. It, was promoted for many years, but it kind of gets out of control and takes over. So we're going to talk a little bit about it. I picked it this week because it is fruiting. So you might see berries around. I've seen it posted on a lot of plant ID sites lately. What is this cool plant? It's like, oh, it is kind of cool. And people certainly thought that when they introduced it. It does have some neat features to it, but it does not play well with others and will take over.
Mm. All right. Well, looking forward to your presentation.
This week for pesky plants, we're going to be talking about autumn olive. Autumn olive is a fast growing shrub that can form really dense thickets that take over. It's especially common in reclaimed mining sites and other disturbed high light areas like roadsides, fields, grasslands, open woodlands, but you can find it hanging out in those shadier spots, just waiting for the opportunity to take off. It was promoted for many years, and now we know that it is too much of a good thing and not to plant it on your property. So in this edition of Pesky Plants, I'm going to be talking a little bit about autumn olive, what it looks like, why it's a problem, and how you can control it. So autumn olive, or Elaeagnus umbellata, is a rapidly growing early colonizing species that's able to outcompete. Oh, can you all see my screen and everything? I got a
Yes.
note.
Yes.
Look at, okay, great. It's able to outcompete native plants, especially on poor quality sites. Its roots actually have nitrogen fixing bacteria in them that enable autumn olive to thrive in nutrient poor sites, which again, could be a good thing and is part of why it was promoted for many years. It can grow in places where other things really struggle, but then it will take them over and prevent them from being able to establish. Autumn olive is easy to pick out because its leaves have a shiny silver color on their undersides. You can see me flipping over one of those leaves, and these silvery scales there that really stick out as it blows in the wind. It's a multi-stemmed dense shrub that grows thickly and can form these really dense thickets that exclude native species in a range of medium to high light settings in particular. Autumn olive is native to Asia, and it was promoted for many years in the US because its ability to thrive on those poor sites, used as a windbreak and revegetation of disturbed areas. Two, because its berries and the cover it creates are good for some wildlife. And three, because those berries are actually edible and people will eat them, harvest them, and typically turn them into fruit leather or jelly. However, it's now apparent that the negatives that autumn olive has outweigh those positives. In Kentucky's woodlands, the biggest threats are in areas in and around those reclaimed mines, which were commonly planted with autumn olive. However, it's also common in a wide range of habitats, everything from your more urban areas to your really remote locations. So autumn olive can grow into a large shrub, really a small tree up to 20 feet tall, and it produces many stems per plant. It has this dense spreading form. You can see here with lots and lots of shoots coming off of that one main plant in a bit of a tangle. With that, it also has branches that have occasional spines, which can be hazardous and painful. So you can see some of those here. Definitely not something you want to be running into in the woods. Its leaves are light green on the upper surface and have a distinctive silvery color on the underside, these silvery scales there. They aren't too notable otherwise. They kind of have an oval shape. They're a couple inches long with smooth margins, and they are alternately arranged on this branch. So you can see they kind of are on opposite sides there. As with many other invasive shrubs, the leaves of autumn olive leaf out early in the season, earlier than many of our natives, and they lose those leaves later in the season than many of our native plants. In the spring, it produces abundant white and yellow flowers that can be fragrant. And these develop into berries in the late summer and fall. They start out kind of a greenish color, and then they'll turn red over time. And you can see in this picture that those berries have these little dots on them as well, giving them a kind of dotted texture. These berries are eaten by birds and can be spread long distances that way. What are some lookalikes to autumn olive? The closest lookalikes are actually cousins, Russian olive and thorny olive, which are also invasive. So the good news is that if you see them, they are also a problem and you don't want them either. But autumn olive is by far the most common one in Kentucky. Depending on where you are though, there have been reports of Russian olive and thorny olive as well. So how do they look different from autumn olive? This is Russian olive, and you can see that it's silvery not only on the underside, but also on the top of the leaf. And those leaves are more narrow, almost like the leaf of a willow. It's a very kind of long, narrow leaf. And then thorny olive, it has larger and wider leaves than autumn olive, and more thorns, right? But the fruits of each of these also look different. And regardless, these are all invasive plants to be on the lookout for and to remove if you find. As with any invasive plant, when we're talking management, it's going to require patience and persistence. Prevention is always the best management option. So don't plant autumn olive. And if you've got it, the sooner you can get rid of it, the better. I have talked with people who, they were recommended to plant it, and it does rapidly colonize in different areas, but it's not something you want to be introducing. You want to be getting rid of that or using more valuable native species that are going to be benefiting you long term there. Management approaches really depend on the severity of your infestation and what else is growing with the autumn olive. Do you have one little plant growing out by itself? Do you have autumn olive mixed in through other vegetation that you value and want to keep? Or do you just have an entire field of nothing but autumn olive? Your management approach is going to vary depending on what you've got. Because it commonly forms expansive, dense thickets with nothing else growing intermixed, management of autumn olive typically looks a little different in those settings. And as with other invasive plants, I encourage you to prioritize management where the greatest impact can be had. While there are different philosophies and approaches to that, many land managers will adopt the best first approach with something like autumn olive that is really well established here, and it's not going away. I think it's really important to be thinking about how can you have the biggest sustained impact over time, something that you can continue, because that autumn olive will definitely come back, even if you get rid of it once. Seedlings like these here and young plants can be pulled up either by hand or with tools to assist, or managed by repeated cutting or even grazing. But management of larger infestations typically involves the use of systemic herbicides that can be applied in different ways. And it, again, depends on what you have and the situation there, from a foliar spray to a stem-based approach with a cut stump or a basal bark treatment. Mechanical removal alone of those larger plants on a large scale typically isn't ideal. First, it'll result in a lot of site disturbance, which is great for the establishment of new invasive plants. And then it will probably leave root fragments that will grow into new plants pretty quickly. In addition, any cutting that occurs without an herbicide afterwards really just sets things back, but that autumn olive is going to sprout back up just as bad, if not worse. So you will have rapid, dense resprouts. The fact that autumn olive leaves out earlier than native plants and keeps its leaves later can be useful in management, both in terms of you having an opportunity to scout for autumn olive and other invasive shrubs when other things don't have their leaves on, but also a window of time where you can treat with foliar herbicides when other things aren't going to have their leaves out then. So with a limited number of plants or with plants that are growing mixed with desirable species, a cut stump or basal bark herbicide application can be a good option since those are going to target just the autumn olive plants and not things that are nearby. There are a number of effective herbicides that can be used for this approach. Commonly, triclopyr is used, but there are many different triclopyr formulations that can be better suited to different contexts and different application techniques. In addition, there are additional surfactants and dyes that can make this work more effective and easier. I really encourage you to always read that label and follow it. Shop around for the right herbicide for what you're doing. And then when you do that, read that label and follow it. Not only will that give you directions for how to use it, how to be safe, and how to apply that legally. For more extensive infestations, one common strategy, this is situations where you've got nothing but autumn olive. So a huge field of autumn olive. One common strategy is to prepare a site first by mowing, so mechanically removing what's there. With your smaller stuff, it could be with a bush hog. With your larger tree-like plants, you might want to use a forestry head. And then following that with treatment of those cut stumps with an herbicide or a foliar spray of what shoots back up. That would be later in that season or even in the following spring, a foliar herbicide application of those new shoots, which will really rapidly pop up. There have even been examples of aerial herbicide spray for autumn olive where people will use a helicopter to treat large expanses of nothing but autumn olive. Again, though, the goal there is really to set things back. And the challenge ahead of you is how do you get something other than autumn olive colonizing there? It may require extensive management, bringing in seeds for that, and really actively monitoring the autumn olive that comes back in after you do that. So it's not a once and done approach. There are many different effective herbicides for this approach as well. And then long term, you're going to need to continue scouting and managing. Here's a tiny little seedling of autumn olive coming up. Seeds will continue to grow in a site, both from the seed bank as well as deposited by birds. You may have removed the autumn olive on your property, but your neighbors may still have it, and that's going to keep coming in from birds. So something to continue being on the lookout for. In some cases, prescribed fire can be a useful part of long-term autumn olive management, although a note that fire alone is going to be insufficient to control it because that's going to maybe impact the top portion, but it could still sprout back up from the roots. So with that, I want to thank you for joining me today and learning a little bit more about the invasive plant autumn olive. Thanks for fighting invasive plants and for promoting the health of your woodlands. And I'm going to stop my share and see what questions we have. Oh, great. I see we've got some good conversation in the chat of what different people have used. Appreciate everyone who was in there commenting. If any others have good things that have worked for them or things that have not, please feel free to include those. One thing that I have heard is that for autumn olive, glyphosate is just not going to be as effective as some other options. Not all herbicides are created the same, and there can be some better herbicides, particularly for autumm olive, they'll be more effective.
One of the comments we got, Dr. Crocker, was about, and it's a great suggestion. We ought to think about how we could go about it, but a show on herbicide use and timing and that, and, maybe what to do with the excess herbicide and stuff like that. So I think that's a good suggestion. So Paul, thank you for that. We'll certainly make note of that.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, I would love to do
sure
that.
with
And
my
I
phone.
see that joining us today, we've got Joe O'Melian, who is an extension person here at the University of Kentucky and a specialist in herbicides. He knows
Oh.
everything about them. So Joe,
Joe, you
feel
might be
free
on-
to
Uh-oh,
join
Joe.
us.
You're on the warm-up deck, Joe. Get ready.
Yeah, I see you. I see you joining us today.
Love it. Love it.
So
Hey, no, it is-
that would be wonderful.
It is a good point. And Paul, we do appreciate it. Yeah, and we want to be helpful to landowners. So that's a good one.
Yeah, definitely. And someone said that they said that deer won't eat the plant. So they said it was very sad. But I would see that definitely. It would be sad if that deer won't eat that plant if it takes over like those pictures that you had on.
Yeah, and it does provide cover for deer and other wildlife. So I think for many years it was promoted as a wildlife species, but as with our other invasive plants, I'm not saying that autumn olive is totally terrible in every possible way, right? It does produce cover, and it does produce these berries that you can make jelly with and fruit leather, but overall it's a net negative. If it did those things and it allowed a diversity of native plant species, that would be ideal, because then you would support a diversity of wildlife species as well. But it doesn't. It grows in these really dense stands that aren't going to give you the diversity that you need to then support a diversity of wildlife.
Yeah, certainly can impede with any other management efforts you may be trying to do for sure. So,
Well, and I will warn you that if you Google autumn olive and you look on YouTube, what you will find are many, many videos about how to propagate it and how to grow it and how to harvest the berries, which is, one of the frustrations with it is that people can use it and that's great, but that shouldn't make us overlook the negatives with that as well. I'm all about making lemonade from those lemons. And if you've got good recipes for your favorite fruit leather or jelly, let me know. It'd be wonderful to hear more, but definitely not something we want to be promoting.
Don't want to plant it to get it. If you have it, okay, that's one
There's
thing.
plenty. We don't
Yeah.
need to plant more of it.
yes, more than we need. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Crocker. Do appreciate all your
Thanks for having
efforts.
me on.
Keep our forest healthy and productive. So it's important what you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wow.
Actually, we had an interesting show.
We went from climate education and climate literacy to learning about hummingbirds and what we can do, and about a wonderful festival coming up this weekend in Western Kentucky. And then we got to hear from Dr. Crocker about a plant that is causing some serious issues, even though it is being kind of propagated on the internet as being this magical thing. So you can't always believe everything you see on the internet, unfortunately.
Definitely not, unfortunately. But if you do have any questions whatsoever about things that you've seen on our show, you can go to fromthewoodstoday.com, and all of our shows are there. Within a week, we usually post, like today's show will be posted next week, and you can see all of them there and binge watch to your heart's content. So we really appreciate you being here every week, because we couldn't do it without you.
Certainly, yeah. And thank you all so much for being here. And Renee, if you don't mind, a quick shout out to our friends out in the Ohio County region. We had a big woodland owner regional meeting last night in Ohio County and had landowners from around the area there. So big thanks to all of them for showing up. And I would let you know, if you're a landowner or a county agent, we're going to be trying to do these regional woodland owners across the state over the next few years. So it's a chance to kind of get out and meet some other landowners locally. So be on the lookout for those.
Wonderful. Wonderful. All right. Well, that's all we have for today. We greatly appreciate you joining us, and we will see you next week at 11 o'clock on Wednesday. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
From the woods today.